Where is the hope? Millions feel demoralized by the decay around us. Where is the hope? The hope that each of us has is not in who governs us or what laws are passed or what great things we do as a nation. Our hope is in the power of God working through the hearts of people, and that is where our hope is in this country, and that is where our hope is in this life. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. If you don't know by now, my name is Amy Watson and I am your host. I can't believe we are at the beginning of the 7th season of the podcast, which we are calling Trauma and You. This season we will focus on how different people experience trauma and how various situations, like what we'll talk about today, can and do affect even those of you without a history of trauma. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. The fact remains, though, that much of what is happening in this world right now is new to most of us. So even though we can look back on the history books, many of us have not felt some of the overwhelming feelings of anxiety and fear and insecurity as we are today. So today I want to talk a little bit about thriving through this season of unrest, this lack of safety, and really the overall ickiness in this world. The fact of the matter is most of us are walking around with dysregulated nervous systems as a result of the bombardment of tragic news that is sitting in our past, it's sitting in our present, and yes, it is coming for us in our future. As a result, we are seeing mental health issues continuing to rise sharply, including substance abuse remaining at an all-time high. The fact of the matter is that the world is unsafe, and that cannot be ignored. And perhaps it's more unsafe right now in 2024 for those of us who have been on the planet, not in the last thousands of years. And so the world is unsafe. It's always been unsafe, but this is new to us. For those of us living with a history of trauma, the happenings of this world threaten to set us back in our recovery. And for me, sometimes, if I don't take care of myself like I hope to teach you to do today, I forget all the things that I have learned in terms of coping. And sadly, sometimes I forget the sovereignty of God. Sometimes I don't want to think about that because it invokes questions of God that will remain unanswered, even though He promised evil in this world. Guys, I don't know about you, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. I feel guilty sometimes when I'm feeling these things because I'm the one that's supposed to be helping others navigate trauma in their lives. I do that for work. I'm getting a doctorate degree doing it. I have this podcast. But lately, a lot of my energy has simply been diverted to finding and using my own oxygen mask. This is not easy to do for any of us. But maybe you find yourself in the same situation. The person who needs your attention right now may be you. Especially during this time of extreme unrest and relentless fear of simple things like sending your kids to school. In some cases, some people can barely afford to feed their families. At this point in time in America, as I just mentioned, school violence is real, maybe more real than it's been in a while. Parents are faced with hard decisions regarding their children's education. Not to mention the children themselves who do not know a world where they don't have to be afraid to go to school. Now, I'm from Generation X, and I was never afraid to go to school. We never had to hide under desks. We never had a safe room. We never had magnets on our door. So these kids are dealing with some things, and so are the parents. In this world right now, truth is hard to come by. There isn't a felt sense of safety in general, as I mentioned, and consequently, most of us are walking around highly stressed and filled with anxiety and depression. Those who already live with a mental health diagnosis like I do, like PTSD, are finding their treatments less effective, and setbacks and healings, these things for us, these setbacks are real. Complicating factors. It's election season in America, bringing instability and fear of the unknown. The constant bombardment of information coming into us, I read one time, would actually crash a mainframe computer. But whether that information is true or not, it is seeking to divide people, even among families, and worse, among Christians. If you are a Christian, maybe it will encourage you that the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord. That's a verse we see in Proverbs, and that verse continues to say, he turns it whatever direction he desires. Again, the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord. He turns it whatever direction he desires. I'll put that verse in the show notes. It is found in the book of Proverbs. He turns it in whatever direction he desires. Guys, no human ruler is worthy of our loyalty to the point that said loyalty seeks to destroy our mental health, our relationships with people, and more importantly, God. They are flawed humans, including the propensity. These people who are running for office and election, they are flawed humans, and they have the same propensity that you have and that I have, that the Bible says that the heart is desperately wicked. And so they have the same wicked heart that we all do. So I ask this question: why are we putting so much emotional energy into who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? I know many of you are concerned of one candidate over the other because perhaps they represent your beliefs or values. Still, if we're being honest, neither of America's choices represent Jesus. So can we represent Jesus? One candidate may, in your opinion, give America the best economic chance or protect democracy. Another candidate may protect some other rights that are important to you. But is either one of them worthy to do what your Jesus can do? Can we trust that the king's heart is truly in God's hands and find peace when we focus on him? Can we all agree that our earthly provisions come from above, not who sits in the Oval Office? Can we do what we say and believe and trust the Lord that he has our future secure and that the war has already been won? What if the worst happens and the worst candidate sits at that desk in the Oval Office? Do we believe God when he says that he concerns himself with these things? What if we lose everything and have no idea where our next meal is coming from? Can we still trust that God knows what he's doing? Can we step outside of our desire to be safe and trust that God has all of it under control? I know that this podcast is listened to all around the world. This one primarily maybe to Americans. However, what happens here does affect the world. But as Americans, we tend to focus on our darkness. But despite how some of us act, we are not the only humans on the planet. The entire world seems to be dark, with wars being waged in the Ukraine and Israel and all over the world. Wars are being waged. Humans are being trafficked. Innocent people are dying. So just like I said at the beginning, where is the hope? As I mentioned in that quote, I opened with, our hope is not in who governs us or what laws are passed. Our hope is in God, who protected Daniel in the lion's den. He protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And he rattled the prison chains for Paul and Silas. Our God is in control. A.W. Tozer said he is not relenting his authority. But it is perfectly human to forget these things. And so I'm here to remind you and to remind me that our God, as Mama Bootsy used to say, is not wringing his hands in heaven over any of it. And if the worst possible thing happens to us, he is with us. Isaiah 43 talks about how he walks through dark waters with us. He walks through fire with us. Will we choose the audience with the king with the big K, even if fear, destruction, and death may come over the comfort that we seek and the release from the fear? Will we choose the audience with the king, even if it means that we are still fearful, we still feel destitute, and we might even die? Will we still choose the audience with the big K, king? We are all dealing with people in our lives who are ruled by fear, and that fear can sometimes come across as anger. Here's where I want to talk to you a little bit about some relationships. You need to understand that if you are afraid right now, or somebody in your life is afraid right now, that is completely normal. As I mentioned, we have listeners all over the world, so I'm not just talking to Americans, even though we think that we have the monopoly on a world gone mad. And maybe we do. But right now I'm talking to everyone living on the planet. It is dark out there. So how do we survive it? And for the Christian, how can we be that light sitting on a hill? And how can we remember that the light of Jesus cannot be overtaken by darkness, not even the darkness of a world gone mad? Because we know that the darkness of this world is real, and it can be challenging for those of us who have experienced trauma to remain unaffected, and for some, step backwards and fail to remember their coping mechanisms. It is hard to keep the faith when all around us is telling us that we have no reason to hope. But we do. Because the Bible tells us in Romans that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared to the glory that revealed in us. The sufferings of this world we find in 2 Corinthians, the sufferings of this world are light in comparison to eternity, and they are producing something. And it's that hope that helps us survive if we're diligent about setting our minds on things above in our hearts. Not on today, not on tomorrow, not on yesterday, but on eternity. Because when we look at these things in the grand scheme of things in eternity, and we think about and we know that people are dying without Jesus, these things don't seem so scary anymore, because our mission given to us by the Great Commission is to go preach the gospel, making disciples. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Philippians 4:8. And in fact, we're going to talk about that, almost that entire chapter for our conversation here today, and how to keep your sanity in a world that has gone mad. We can use this verse as a screener of some sorts in terms of the kinds of information that we're consuming, the conversations we're having, period. When we focus on these things and work to kick out any thought or ruminations that are not these 8 things, we stand a better chance of a regulated nervous system. Anxiety and depression can be kept in check, but we must focus on these things, as Paul reminds us in Philippians 4. I'm going to start with verse 8, and then we're going to go backwards. Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are a good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise," the Bible tells us, Paul tells us to think on these things. And remember, he was writing this to the church of Philippi from prison. But let's back up a little bit, because there is one verse in Philippians chapter 4 that is so completely often taken out of context. And I'm going to show you how this helps us navigate a world that's gone bad. Paul begins the chapter with his normal greetings and gratitudes. But he starts verse 4 with, and remember, we're teaching strategies to live in a world that's gone bad. A world that's gone mad. Paul's world was both. But he says to the church of Philippi as he's writing from prison, "Rejoice in the Lord always." And I will say it again, rejoice. Now, I know that there's not many things to rejoice about, but this verse is in the Bible, and it means that we must seek those things worth rejoicing. Remember that king with the K? I saw a t-shirt this morning that said, "Be grateful you're on God's wake-up list. He has you here for a reason." So Paul tells us to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. In a world gone mad, verse 5, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." Us arguing with people and having conversations and diving into conspiracy theories is not pointing people to Jesus. Paul tells us in verse 4 to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. And then he says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." And then verse 6 is a very difficult one, but it's in the Bible. We can't ignore it. "Do not be anxious for anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition present your requests to God." Now, it's easy to say don't be anxious, and we can work to make our lives not an anxious lifestyle. But the fact of the matter is the world gone mad is going to invoke some anxiety in us. And for those of us living with mental health diagnoses, we're definitely going to have some anxiety. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your request to God. What if every time you were afraid, you presented your request to God? "Lord, help my unbelief. Bring me peace to my heart. Help me know that you're sovereign, that the battle is already won." And so do not be anxious for anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, present your request to God. And then in verse 7, I love it. And then the peace, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and mind. Is it possible to walk around without a dysregulated nervous system with a peace that transcends all understanding, guarding our hearts and minds? Yes, if we will rejoice in the Lord always. Let your gentleness be evident to all. Do not be anxious, but in every situation by prayer and petition, turn that anxiety into prayers. Present your request to God, and then the peace of God, which transcends all understandings, will guard your hearts and mind. Now, Paul probably thought, they're really going to have a problem with these 4 verses. And so let me go back to verse 8, where he says, okay, he tells us to rejoice in the Lord always. Be gentle, be anxious for nothing, but by every situation, prayer and petition, present your request to God, and then the peace of God will transcend all understanding. That's verse 7. And then in verse 8, he's just kind of saying, I know what you guys are thinking. So finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So then Paul goes on to talk about his experience with provision after that. And when we go down to verse 11, he says, I'm not saying this because I am in need, but I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances. Now remember, Paul was writing this from prison, arguably a world gone mad. But he says, I have learned in whatever state I am, that the King James Version says, to be content. And then verse 12 and 13, he says, I know what it's like to be in need, and I know what it's like to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then this verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So Paul tells us, let's back up, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. Be anxious for nothing, but by prayer and supplication present your request to God. And then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. Verse 8. And then in 11, he says, I have learned, no matter what, to be content. He talks about how he knows how it is to be in need, and he knows how it's like to be plenty, but he has learned the secret of being, this isn't the Bible, I'm not making this up. Paul said, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in poverty or want. And that secret is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. After getting ready for this podcast, this chapter has taken on a whole new meaning for me because Paul's final words to the church at Philippi are comforting for us today. The formula is simple. Think about wholesome things. Rejoice even in our suffering. Be gentle to others. Stop arguing. Stop bickering. It's not winning anyone over to Jesus. When you're anxious, don't be anxious, but when you're anxious, pray and present your concerns to God. Then the peace that passes all understanding. Then Paul describes what he has lived through, essentially feast and famine, but that he had learned contentment. But the real crown jewel of this chapter, as I mentioned, is after he tells them all the things that seems impossible, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So that verse is not just a locker room poster. This is the real deal. This is how we can live in a world gone mad, by learning to be content and learning to rejoice and learning to present our requests to God and experiencing that peace that passes understanding and filtering our thoughts and setting our minds on eternity. We can do that. Paul was certainly living in some dark times, yet he was the light. God, this just blows my mind, y'all. He was the light that God decided to spread the gospel around the world. I mean, the first missionary. This is why Europe got the gospel. And this is why, after that, North America got the gospel. Paul had known suffering. He had no doubt endured some of the things that we're enduring, but he found the secret that he could do all things through Jesus. I don't know about you, but that brings peace to my soul. Please understand me, though. Even though I speak these words, I'm fighting fears resulting from a world that has gone mad. But I know that something better is coming for us and that this world is not our home. Even if we endure the worst possible outcome we can conjure in our minds, God will be there. Many of you know Or if you don't, this will be new to you, but many of you know the 3 C's of this podcast, and I believe they are vital to this conversation. We need our community to help us remember where our help comes from and to encourage us when the dark seems overwhelming. We need our churches to speak truth. I literally can't stress this one enough. We need our churches to speak truth in a world that's gone mad so that we can find peace in that truth. For some of us, we need to raise our counseling game because the fears of the world affect those of us living with a history of trauma. So we need a little extra help. I would argue that everyone who can get counseling should do so, and as many of you know, that helping people get counseling is this podcast's mission. As usual, I'll link the Patreon link if you want to be part of helping someone do that. The fact of the matter is that Scripture answers this world's problems. Moreover, God has called people like me to help people like me, meaning those who have lived through trauma, suffering, and struggle to regulate in an unsafe world. This is probably the most incredible privilege of my life. I want the things that I have endured to matter and to help others know the same God, the same hope that rules my life can rule yours too. The other day I was at the hospital and a patient asked me a question that rendered me speechless. I was sharing a little of my story and they hoped to be on the other side of the psych ward too, and they just simply said to me, "How are you okay?" Working in a secular environment, I had a choice because I'm not allowed to talk about the things of God. But I knew that it was such a moment that I would one day stand before my Lord and Savior on. And I just simply answered God and his people. The answer opened up a door for me to talk to them about the hope that I believe there is. And at that moment, I do not think they received it. And you may not be receiving the first part of this podcast because of your relationship or lack thereof with God. For you especially, I didn't want to end the podcast, though, without sharing some practical help for navigating a world gone bad. I have implemented many of these things into my own life and daily routine and find that they help with the threat of the commandeering fear, which is these things are just practical. And so these are some of the things that I do and that I would strongly encourage you guys to do. I firmly believe that God is in control. And that Tozer quote that says that God has not surrendered his authority. That is so important for us to remember. And here's the Tozer quote before we get into the practical stuff. While it looks like things are out of control, behind the scenes there is a God who has not surrendered his authority. This world has gone mad, guys. Paul has given us the answers in Philippians 4. God has given us the answers in community and in church and in counseling. But for those of you who do not believe, and even for those of you that do believe in the star of the story, who is Jesus, who can get us through this and who has already won this epic battle against good versus evil, but we still have to live on this planet. And so here are some practical things as we close out the podcast that I do that kind of helps me stay sane and I don't suffer as much as I would if I didn't do some of these things. The very first practical thing you can do is control your consumption of the news. This is especially true if you have a history of trauma and if your safety has been compromised or if you've ever had a time in your life where you didn't know where your next meal was coming from or a roof over your head. The news is only going to destroy you. The news does not fall into Philippians 4:8. Now, I don't want you to be ignorant to the things of this world. And so for me, I have people that I trust. It is hurricane season in Florida. I don't watch the news, but my friends do. And there's somebody that I trust on Facebook, a news reporter on Facebook, that I just watch him. I don't turn on the TV because of situations like that, hurricanes and all the things that are going on in the world. They're always going to make it worse. And unfortunately, so much of what's in the news is not even true. You trust no one, trust nothing in so many ways. Control your consumption of the news. Find some news that you trust. Find some news that is unbiased. And I would go so far as to say find some news that is not United States based. BBC is a good option for the news. But control your consumption of the news and you'll control your anxiety and your fear. The second one is refrain from conversations surrounding the election, period. There's no reason to have conversations right now. Nothing good can come of it Refrain from conversations surrounding the election. I would also ask you as a trauma survivor to be careful about the visceral stuff that people put on social media about the election. Stop it. Just stop it. And if you're finding that your news feed is filled with this stuff, mute those people or stay off of social media, because nothing good is coming of it. Nothing good is coming from the news. Nothing good is coming from social media, by and large, particularly as it pertains to the election. It's not Philippians 4:8. This next one I'm going to talk to you about, some of you are not going to be happy with me about, but stop it with the conspiracy theories. This only serves to upset people and to cause fear and anxiety and angst and depression and suicide and more violence. Stop it with the conspiracy theories. There's only one theory that you need to know about, and that is God is sovereign, and He knows exactly what is going on. If you try to understand the minds of wicked and evil people on this planet, it is going to rub off on you, and you're going to have the ick of a world gone mad. Conversely, one of the things that you should be doing is having meaningful connections. Go out of your way, even if you don't have time. And I am preaching to the choir, as I am working a full-time job, own a business, have a podcast, and I'm in school. But it is really important, at least once or twice a week, to make meaningful connections to people that call you higher, that love you, and that you love, and that you can just connect, and just for a little bit, like you're stepping out into reading a book, you're in a different world. Meaningful connections. Another one you can do is, and I'm going to put these two together, is journaling. And when you journal, neutralize the fear. What would happen if the worst possible thing happened? What would that actually look like? And when you neutralize the fear, one of my people who I call, she's on hashtag team, Amy Lauren Starnes, taught me to neutralize the fear. Okay, you're afraid you're going to live in your car. Well, let's talk about that. What would that look like? And so neutralize your fears. You can do that by journaling. You can do that with a friend. You can do that in therapy. But journaling and neutralizing the fear. The four main ones, and we did a podcast on this with Lauren Starnes about when the body talks. Make sure you're hydrating. And if you think you're hydrated enough, hydrate more. Make sure you're eating. Make sure you're eating well. Make sure you're eating as best as you can afford and as clean as you can afford, but make sure you're eating. And if you find that you're overeating because of your emotional state, especially as it pertains to this world gone mad, please seek help, because you're only hurting yourself. Make sure you're moving your body. I know oftentimes I will sometimes just wake up and it feels like I have enough energy in my body to power an entire city. And so the only thing that helps with that is movement. Jump on a treadmill, go for a walk. And it doesn't need to be a fast walk, but just try to envision some of that angst, that energy getting out of your body as you're moving. Sleep is another really important one as you navigate this world that has gone mad. If you are struggling to sleep, many of these things that we talked about today may be the reason for that. There is support in sleep, and don't be afraid to take medications, because sleep, we see it all the time at the hospital. Patients that come to the hospital in full-on psychosis because they've not slept. And so hydrate, eat, move, sleep is going to be really important for you as we continue to navigate a world gone mad. Take care of your village. I got the idea from this podcast because I read a book that John Eldredge put out in 2020 talking about taking your life back in a world that's gone mad. And he talks about how we are not called to save the world, but we are called to take care of our village. And so as you're thinking about a world gone mad and you're thinking about all the sad things going around all around the world, that's not your village. Your village are your people. Your village is your church. Your village are the people that you work with, your family, your neighborhood. Take care of your village. John Eldredge also said something else in that book that I like, that I think that is really good, especially as we loop back to controlling your consumption of the information coming into your brain, is about your cell phone. And I don't know about you guys, and I don't know why Apple decides every Sunday morning when I'm in church to tell me how much screen time I've had. But now they'll even tell you how much you've spent on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the things. And so control your consumption on your phone. And John Eldredge has a great idea for this. And I do this pretty regularly, actually. But it is divert daily. So put it aside for an hour every day, where you don't pick it up. You can have emergency text messages be able to come through and kind of get through all of it, but put it down, put it away for an hour. Don't pick it up for an hour. And if any of you can tell me that you are able to do that in the first try, then I will give you a big old congratulations, because we are so addicted to our phones. Diverting daily for an hour is much harder than it thinks. Withdrawal weekly, this is a whole day where we're not on our phones. Now, the whole day is a little bit different because you do want to be able to communicate through text messages and stuff like that. But you should have a day a week where you're not on social media, withdrawing weekly. And then abandon annually. 1 week out of every year, you abandon social media, abandon the information bombarding you. More importantly, trust Jesus. He can be trusted even when it doesn't seem like it. And so I hope that today's podcast has helped you guys understand that this world has gone mad. You have not lost your mind. This world has absolutely gone mad. And while there is nothing new under the sun, it is new to us, and we know that. And so I hope that you will take today's podcast in the words of Paul, where he really laid out how we can successfully and peacefully live in a world gone mad. And so I felt really burdened to do this podcast this week, even though I have the generational series planned. I wanted to drop this one because I believe that there are many of you out there that need it. I don't want you guys walking around always afraid when we have everything we need. Remember, we have the King, the big K, the one that saved Daniel and the lions, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the fiery furnace, and the chains off of Paul and Silas. And I can go on and on and on about the God that we have. Job, who was not touched, even though his life was pretty bad, he was not touched. And so trust Jesus. He is a God that can be trusted. If you do not know the star of the story, who is Jesus, you can send me a text message right in the show notes. That only comes to me. I would love to introduce you to the star of the story. For the rest of you, I really hope that you will consider some of these things, make it your own, and not let this mad world make you literally go mad, and not let this mad world literally make you lose your faith. Not let this mad world make you lose relationships. Not let this mad world take you off the planet. Because that's what our enemy wants. The enemy that is here to seek, kill, and destroy us. That's what he wants to do. And if you are at all doing anything for God, you know that Satan is not having that. And so trust Jesus. He can be trusted. I am here. If you guys want to send me messages in any of the ways, all of that is in the show notes. We all need to band together as we navigate these times that are new to us. It is so encouraging to know they're not new to God, though. And so I hope that you guys have found some peace in this. I hope that you will go back and look at Philippians 4 and see how Paul has laid out how we can live with a peace that transcends all understanding because of what we decide to do. We decide to be content. We decide that we understand what it's like to have a lot and have a little. But we found the secret to contentment, and that is that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You guys know what I'm going to say next as I close out the podcast. You are all so unbelievably seen, known, heard, loved, and valued. And we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we will start that generational series with Mama Gowan, representing the silent generation. I'm excited about this season as I talk to different populations of people and different types of trauma, and so that we can all understand that we navigate these things differently. But when it comes to navigating the world that's gone mad, there is only one answer, and his name is Jesus. Just remember that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that's going to be revealed in you. And the sufferings that you have right now are just a momentary affliction in light of what God is going to do on that day when we all meet him. And so you guys have a great 2 weeks, and shoot me a message if you have any questions, and we'll continue to pray for you guys as I ask the same for you. Have a great 2 weeks.
back to life again. I was made for more. Come on, sing it over yourself. So why would I lay, bearing my shame